Up your cross where the world has come.
Peace, Father, Mother, and peace to the friends of Father, Mother Divine, and peace to the universal family of Spirit. This is the first in the category of personal reflections. March 4th is going to have several different categories, Father's letters being one of the main ones that will occupy most of the time, but also keys to understanding various themes that Father Divine addresses, understanding what Father says about those things. Also, going to start going through the Bible with Father Divine, with his metaphysical interpretation of the Bible, verse by verse, with all of the verses that Father Divine commented on, which is a great multitude of verses. And this personal reflection, more spiritual autobiography, more things about my personal views. So those will be segregated into special categories so that it's clear that the things presented here pertain to me and may not be everyone's understanding or experience. I've chosen for the first personal recollection to talk about one of the experiences that Father Divine gave to me, that Father and Mother gave to me, that was very instrumental in my coming to Father Divine, my deepening relationship with Father Divine, my perception of his spiritual depth and spiritual relevance. An experience that I consider miraculous and quite out of the ordinary, in a sense supernatural, but also supernatural, something that is of the true order of nature. It was around the summer solstice in 2014 at Woodmont, which was my second year of going there, my second year of visiting for long periods in the summer, and having personal time with Mother Divine. And it was during that visit that I had a strong impulse, a strong inner guidance, a strong conviction that I should go home, cut the trip short, the planned trip short, by one day. And usually when I have guidance that feels quite that strong, I do what it suggests. If I'm driving, for example, and I have an overwhelming feeling that I should take a different way, a different route, I will do that. And who knows whether it protects me from something that might happen, or leads me into a situation that I need to be led into, or a contact with someone that I need to make, something like that. But I always do that. And it doesn't happen very often, and that's one of the reasons why, if it comes to me with such great clarity and force, I will do it. So that 21st of June 2014, I had the strong feeling that I should leave that afternoon rather than the ensuing afternoon. And I think that the people there wondered why, if I had been offended or if something had happened, if I was unhappy and leaving early, but that had nothing to do with it at all. It was all just this inner guidance, just leave a day early, and it was clear and overwhelming. So I announced that that was my plan, and that I would be going that day. Well, I had an unexpressed desire in my heart a strong and pure desire to see Father Divine's personal bedroom. That was one of the few places on the estate that I had not yet seen. And it seemed extra sacred to me because I knew that Father had thrown off the body there on September the 10th, 1965. And so I assumed that it was a very sacred and blessed atmosphere, and that one would be blessed to go there. And I had heard that it was kept very much like it was in 1965 when Father personally was present to use it, and I was curious to see that. And as the archivist at the time, I was also curious to know what was there of archival relevance that should be documented or moved to the library. Well, that June 21st, 2014 was my first visit to Father's room. And the extraordinary thing, the miraculous thing, was that when I had thought all along I want to go in that room, it's sacred to me, and that day when I was told that I would be given a tour of the house, including Father's room, before I departed, I thought the thing that will preoccupy me most is what happened on September the 10th, 1965. That is what is stamped in that room. Although I didn't think of that as death, it was God's taking on illness and mortality for the sake of the world, and that was as important to me as the crucifixion already at that point. It was as important to me as the salvific work done by other figures in history who have been the incarnation of God, or who have been saintly figures and who have taken on suffering to mitigate the world's suffering. And I felt that Father did that, and that great compassion would also be stamped on the room. Well, when Mother was conducting me through the house on this tour, along with a sister, I had the feeling when we all three went up in this small, old-fashioned elevator, this personal elevator that is within the house, that when we stepped out it would be another time, that it would be like the 1950s, and that Mother would step out into a youthful body and we would go into that room and Father would be present there. I didn't have that expectation, but the thought crossed my mind, and it was an act of spiritual imagination. Wouldn't that be wonderful? That was something that had always been within the scope of my imagination, something I could think about and create with the imagination. What would it be like to time travel and be present in the 50s or the 30s with Father Divine, or before that in the mysterious years before the 19-teens? What would it be like to see Father then? And those kind of contemplative exercises can be very wonderful and interesting, and sometimes I feel they can actually give real glimpses of the reality, or connect us with past life experiences, or with the collective memory of things that is lodged in the so-called ether, in the mind of God, in the whatever the physical materia is in which those kind of memories are stamped. And that didn't happen. But when we crossed the threshold of Father's room, something truly miraculous and more unexpected, something that I could never have imagined, I never read about, I never anticipated, I never thought would unfold in my own life, began to happen. And I was not aware of it until about an hour and a half after the fact. But we crossed into the threshold into Father's room, led in there by Mother Divine, as the guardian of wisdom, the high priestess of all these great mysteries. And I entered a state of immortality, which is to say, I entered a state in which I had absolutely no consciousness of death. For the time that I was in the room, and for about an hour after that, in total about an hour and a half, the consciousness of death was completely stricken from my mind, from my being, from my body, from my essence. It did not exist. And for me, this is an important key or an important clue about what Father means about the reality of immortality. And it was the first initiation into what I consider a world of light, a subtle field of light that is more real than what we call material, that penetrates this world. And that is where Father and Mother Divine are. That is where any soul that is transmuted into light is able to go. But that which is being merged or married with the material world in such a way that it's going to increasingly displace and become the visible world. That is the kingdom or the commonwealth of spirit materializing from within as a chick from within the shell. Well, that wasn't quite clear that day, but that was the first real clue about this substrate of reality that is immortal, and that is where Father Divine, Mother Divine are lodged or seated or stationed as Christed or Buddha field consciousnesses. This is what their Christ field or Buddha field is. It is a field of light, present here and now, present everywhere. And there is no death or mortality in it. No guilt, no fallenness, no alienation from the presence of God. And that is the true miracle that Father came, I believe, to give the world. No alienation from the presence of God. An awareness of soul immortality that keeps spirit, mind, and body intact, subtle body, intact, so that they carry forward through the process of rebirth. I personally do not believe that Father has come to permanently abolish the process of rebirth. And I don't believe that that's what Sri Aurobindo talks about when he talks about spiritualizing the material world in India. But they are parallel visions, and I got the glimpse of one. And that I also consider was a glimpse of what it would be to be stationed in that place in consciousness all the time. To be a true saint who beholds God all the time would be to be in that state. I'm not in that state all the time, but I got the taste of it, the savor of it, the divine flavor of it that day, and consequently was able to visualize, to emotionally access it in meditation and so forth later. So it came as a very important gift. I can kind of recapture the scent or the taste of that experience in a spiritual sense. And I was especially able to do that in the Shrine to Life, in Father's Shrine. But in quiet places, peaceful places in nature, and in the kind of peace that can be achieved through meditation, some of it bubbles up and resurfaces. And I hope that when it comes time to transition out of this body, that Father and Mother help me to have the poise to remain stable through that transition and enter the light, the all-pervading, ever-present, right here light that is the body of God, the glorified body of God, merging with the body of nature, right here, right now. When I left Father's room and said peace to Father and Mother and to the assembled followers who were there to see me off, I drove out very peaceful, very happy, very calm and collected, grateful, expressing gratitude for that time at Woodmont, that time with Father and Mother, that time in Father's room, and was driving happily along on the interstate. Oh, when I left the gates, I noticed on the dash clock that it was 4:44. And that's an interesting and meaningful time. So I was leaving Woodmont at 4:44, crossing the threshold of the gates into the greater world at that time, on summer solstice, or perhaps the day before summer. I'm not sure what day it fell on that year, but around summer solstice, 2014. And so, that was the time that Egyptian civilization linked with first time, first creation, and immortality, concepts of immortality, Zep Tepi or Zep Tepi. It's rendered both ways, and I'm not sure which would be the most faithful to Egyptian language. But Egyptian first time, creation time, is something very similar, concept very similar. Driving home, at some point on the interstate, about 45 minutes later, an hour later, somebody cut me off. And a natural human mortal reaction kicked into that, and I was peeved, I was upset, whatever. But when that happened, mortality returned, and I became aware that for the last at least hour and a half, I had been somewhere else in my consciousness, where there had never been death. Death was not a part of any relationship. Death was not a part of any awareness at all. It was truly transcendent moment, and I think that it's made the reality of death in this world. Although I do believe there's going to be life extension, Father has indicated that human life will be extended quite significantly. I think that he indicated over 200 years, I think around 240 years, he said science would extend human life. And he did seem to indicate that bodily immortality, or the ability to retain the body as long as one wills, is something that can be achieved through spiritual practice. But he was often very coy, and we'll do Keys to Understanding with excerpts of Father's words. He often would be rather coy when he was talking to outsiders about the prospect of bodily immortality. And he would seemingly give emphasis to Jesus' words that the reborn, the spiritually reborn, would not see death, would not taste death. And that can also be understood because, like changing a garment, they simply drop the old clothes and move into the new. And because they are sheltered in the Christ, the Logos, the cosmic Logos, as Savior. Savior means to preserve, and the relevant preservation is across the chasm of so-called death. When one is sheltered in the bosom of Abraham, or in the high priesthood of Jesus as the Christ, or in Father and Mother Divine, then one, especially after the salvific work of September the 10th, 1965, and March the 4th, 2017, especially after those events, we have unique capacity to understand these transitional phases, these rebirth phases, these willful transmigration phases and stages of the soul's development in a deeper way. And if the fear of death, so-called, is removed from the believer, if it is removed from consciousness such that one steps into the sheltering Christ, and then, as he wills, as they will, into a new body at the appropriate time, greater and greater consciousness is retained. And less belief that one has lost something, or that one has been deprived of meaningful relationships, or of possessions, or role in the world, and all of that. No, one is sheltered in the will of God, and whatever manifests in this body as it transitions, or in future bodies, is entirely up to the will of God. I believe this is something like the mysteries of Eleusis in ancient Greece, where it was said that those who underwent these mysteries, and mystery means to be initiated, mystai means one who is initiated, doesn't mean one goes through a ritual, it means one has a new insight, a new doorway in consciousness has opened. And that's what Mother did for me when she opened the door to Father's room that day. She opened a new doorway in consciousness to the possibility of an awareness in which death is simply not a factor, in which one is aware that death is something that has been imagined, and that it comes from a false identification with the body as the self, rather than a projection of the self, as the whole thing rather than the shell or the garment, the clothing. And so that is what I got that day, and that's why I regard it as a miracle. It's why I regard it as one of the most important things that ever happened in my personal spiritual life or journey. And one of the things that showed me that both Father and Mother Divine have the capacity, here and now, to deliver the spiritual goods, to initiate us into these higher realities and these deeper experiences, to give us a glimpse of the state, so that someday we can evolve into the stage and be that perpetually. When I can perpetually be in that state, calm and equipoised, and in that state perceptive of immortality, then I will be a saint. I will be seeing God. I will be actively participating in the light that I know is God. I will be in the kingdom, or the commonwealth of spirit, whenever and wherever I am. So it is wonderful. Now I would like to read from Facebook posts that were made at the time to close friends. I'll leave out any names or a few details, a few words I'll substitute something else for. But I thought it would be good to give something in my voice from that time when it was all very fresh to me 9 years ago. Safely back home by an unexpected route. I'd forgotten that on the way back I was diverted. We'll be going back to Woodmont in about 3 weeks. I had planned to leave early in the morning, but felt strongly prompted by Spirit to depart suddenly after lunch. I have always been guided by such promptings, or at least always had access to them even when rejecting their guidance. This was probably a blessing, as Mother decided that she wanted to show me Father's bedroom and her own. Mother and a sister, and me going up in an antique phone booth-sized elevator. Who needs to dream when living such archetypes? There is no pretense in this, bathroom and toilets included. Mother wanted me to see the views from each of the windows in her room. Her suite is a lived-in space filled with devotion, no secrets. And it's a house and sister's rooms away from Father's suite, as in Sayville. Father's room is filled with pictures of Mother, just as he left it in 1965. I touched the bed on which he cast off the appearance of man on September 10th. I saw his bathroom, which has turquoise tiles and jet black fixtures. His clothes closet was specially unlocked at Mother's request, and I could see Father's clothes and his tiny shoes, giving me a clearer impression of the dimensions of his body than anything else has so far. I asked if I could touch a pair of shoes, and touched two. I do these things with the Hindu gestures I imbibed so long ago, touching my forehead and heart as I give an above-head namaste to Mother when she leaves the dining room. These are the most natural and authentic gestures to me, and while Woodmont is no stranger to gestures of overflowing devotion and spontaneous tears of gratitude, my gestures are unusual to the place, but authentically appreciated in mutually healthy ways. I mean the Hindu quality of my personal devotional gestures. I was told later that as Mother was approaching her transition, March the 4th, in the week or two before, in her state going to sleep or waking up, she herself would make namaste gesture. And the sister who had witnessed those thought it was meaningful to me, and indeed it was, because of my use of those gestures. Mother is excellent at checking too much emotion. She does have a canny ability to evoke and turn off such things in those who are really, in some sense, her children. It's one way her real spiritual status peeks out from the guise of a vulnerable grandmother. I have felt it a couple times and observed it many more. I think it may have been that day. I'm not sure which trip it was, but I had, I think it was that day, because I was expressing that I needed to return home early, and I was tearing up and full of heartfelt gratitude, and but Mother checked that and said, "Speak up," in a way that made me stop crying. But as regards leaving that day, I know it was that day that she said to me, one of the few things that is an overt instruction. Sometimes we have to follow our heart. Follow your heart. And that was in reference, in particular, to leaving at a particular time that day. In follow-up comments on that Facebook post, I wrote, "The elevator was not only archetypal, but had me wondering, Doctor Who style, the show, the time traveler show, if we'd step out in another time. Of course it was a few seconds later, so I guess it was another time. But it was timeless. It began to feel very timeless and out of time, not within time. Because of the glorious 19th century mansion and the mysterious presence/absence of Father Divine, the invisible presence, I can often see him there, the clearest and most palpable and most self-authenticating visions I've had. So I give thanks to Father and Mother for answering an unspoken prayer. I very much wanted to see Father's room, and I didn't think it was even possible to see Mother's or to go in Father's bathroom and the clothes closet. Father's room had become the mystical bridal chamber and an inner sanctum to me. I mean the place of the marriage of the soul and the highest mysteries. Not something carnal, but the bridal chamber of the mystic soul, and symbolic of the secret place of the Most High. the Holy of Holies. And I wasn't going to presume or ask or indicate interest in any way. I was just going to wait until that unfolded, and I'm so glad I did, because it brought this spiritual gift. So as Father promised and delivered for me once more, the secret place of the Most High will be heard and answered, and the Lord who hears in secret will reward you openly. Praise the living God and the universal body. The aspects of the experience keep unfolding and occurring to me. And a very dear spiritual friend responded, "You are so blessed. Destiny has brought you to this place." And that was true. You know, in my desire to see the room, I thought of September 10th, but I was actually in there. When I was actually in there, it was totally blocked from my mind. There was literally no thought of death in that room. Dear God, it came back to me only after, in the shrine, just before I got in the car. That's some kind of miracle to me. When I sat briefly in the shrine, it hit me. That's the room. When I was in it, it was just Father's room, absolutely no thought of the day. He was both there, and at the same time it was vibrant, with expectancy that he could return bodily at any moment. This is really the true spirit of mystical Christianity. Christ was, is, and is to come. Christ is both ourselves and our Lord, and the soul is ever consecrated to God alone. If I had any doubt after getting to see Father's room, the fact that I left the gates at exactly 4:44 confirmed my decision to suddenly leave yesterday afternoon rather than this morning. April the 13th, 2015. It grows and grows on me that the brief time I was in Father Divine's room and lost all consciousness of death, even though I expected to be preoccupied with the thought, this is where Father put aside the body, was of major personal significance, and that it didn't come back for some time, up to half an hour after I left Woodmont that day. I really think it was a profoundly different state of awareness, even though I can only think of it as the absence of something that's normally there and deep as the marrow. I feel it is a glimpse of some aspect of Father's state of being, so amazing and so inexpressible. It was so unexpected. I had a wild hair, and I felt I had to leave a day early, and that was Father's clear and direct guidance. And that prompted Mother to show me Father's room, just as it was on the 10th of September 1965. I wonder if she would have otherwise. On departure, she said, "Well, you just have to do what your heart tells you." It's not an experience I'd ever thought about or one I had anticipated, but Father's room that day seemed like another existential or ontological reality, and a key part of this ordinary reality simply fell completely away without the transition being noticed until death returned. Now I know the experience is not as replicable as crossing a threshold, and I don't know if I'll ever inhabit that specific awareness again. Going in, I did, and it is accessible in meditation, as I said. Going in there a second time may be a relatively mundane experience. I do want that consciousness, though, very much. Like almost every similar spiritual inexpressible, it is something that can almost be remembered, but not quite. But I think I have had an Edenic glimpse of what it means that the living Word has conquered death, of what it means to be or become immortal. It really is one of the most extraordinary things that has ever happened to me, and yet so very understated. And I had been discovering and continued to discover that kind of understated quality was actually characteristic of Father and Mother Divine, both their presence and the kind of miracles and awakenings they facilitate. Yes, there were spectacular miracles that included spontaneous healings and people being raised from the dead even in the 1930s and before, and a few perhaps afterwards. Spectacular miracles of that sort did happen, but they were not typical or characteristic, and Father tended not to draw attention to them personally. This kind of understated thing, woven into the fabric of organic experience, is in fact much more typical of what I experienced and what the majority of people experienced about Father's extraordinary, omniscient, and omni-adaptive spiritual presence and guidance. Thank you for listening to this personal reflection, and I thank Father and Mother Divine.